Well, good evening, and I'd like to call to order this planning meeting for the town of Saugeen Shores and extend a welcome to everyone in the chambers this evening. The first item on the agenda is additions, deletions, or amendments to the agenda. We have nothing under that. The next item is a declaration of pecuniary interest, and I'll remind every member of your responsibility to do so. Nothing noted. Then the next item on the agenda is adoption of the May 22nd, 2018 minutes. It's been moved by Councillor Grace and seconded by Councillor Minaj that the Planning Committee minutes dated May 22nd, 2018 are hereby approved as circulated. Go ahead and start here. Vice Deputy Mayor.
There's a comment in the minutes about a definition of affordable housing that sort of takes a number of items and puts them into, affordable housing is something below $900 a month in rent. I guess as a question, because that was a little different than what we actually talked about during the meeting. Perhaps at a future meeting, can we get a definition of affordable housing that we all agree is the definition of affordable housing for Saugeen Shores to kind of use in the discussions? Because what's in the minutes isn't exactly what we saw or talked about during the meeting. Thank you.
Sure. Councillor Grace?
That was my question as well. Thank you.
Okay. Sure. Any other comments or errors or omissions? All in favor of them? Opposed, if any, that's carried. So this evening we have two public meetings, and the intent of the public meeting is for staff to make a presentation to committee or to give the public an opportunity to comment on these particular applications, and council or committee to question or clarify anything, and then staff will come back at a later date summarizing all the comments with a recommendation for council. So that, having said that, the very first meeting is Saugeen Shores Official Plan Amendment number 29, 18.46, and Zoning Bylaw 23-18.48. Michael Trelford, Ron Davison for 164 and 158 Albert Street South, Southampton, and I'll turn it over to our planner to give us our presentation.
I'll just wait for it to come up on the screen here. Perfect. So this is an application for a local official plan and zoning bylaw amendment, and it has been brought forward by Ron Davidson, Land Use Planning Consultants, and the application covers both of these properties here. So 164 and 158 Albert Street in Southampton, so basically at the intersection of Albert Street and Spence Street. So just to give a little bit of site context, currently there is residential uses on both properties. So we've got two detached homes as well as a commercial use in this structure here. It's an office and garage. And then all the surrounding uses are a residential over here and then commercial kind of on this side here. It is serviced with municipal water and sewer and currently takes access from Albert Street, but as you'll see in the proposal, there will also be access taken from Lee Lane here as well. So the purpose of this application and the subject lands, so a little bit more context, is to change the land use designation for a portion of the two properties from highway commercial to residential, and to rezone those same lands from highway commercial to R1 in order to allow for the creation of 3 new residential lots. The proposal would also change the highway commercial zoning at 158 Albert Street, which is the smaller property here, to permit for a reduced lot area and frontage. So this is the official plan designation with the highway commercial and the residential, and then this is the zoning here, which again matches currently, and the changes would happen to the same portions of the lot, which is this kind of rear half here, fronting onto Lee Lane. So just to give an overview of the policies in terms of the Saugeen Shores official plan and the zoning bylaw. So starting with the local official plan, as mentioned, both subject properties are designated highway commercial, and residential uses are not permitted as a use in this designation. As such, the application is to redesignate the subject lands as residential. The configuration and size of the proposed lots limits additional commercial uses as they currently exist. The property at 158 Albert Street, which is this one here, is entirely residential in use and is currently too small to accommodate traditional highway commercial uses. While larger, the property here at 164 Albert Street is also limited in terms of commercial use. The existing accessory building houses a commercial use as mentioned, but the existing residential use does limit any expansion on the property. And the rear of these properties can be considered surplus commercial land, so this portion here, as they do not contribute to the overall availability of highway commercial lands in the town of Saugeen Shores. The proposed residential development would be considered infill development and would be in line with the town's official plan intensification policies, which establishes a target of 10% intensification, as you know, and so these lots would contribute to that target. Section 3.3.5.2 of the official plan also establishes criteria that shall be included in evaluating infill and intensification. These criteria include the availability of municipal services, the availability of parking, off-street parking, compatibility with the existing neighborhood, the maintenance of existing vegetation, the accessibility of community services, and the ability to buffer from any impacts. And in general, we're confident that the proposal meets these criteria, but I'm definitely willing to discuss those at this meeting. The proposed residential use is compatible with surrounding properties and represents the highest and best use of these rear properties. In terms of the zoning bylaw, the HC zoning is intended to establish areas for the location of large format retail and commercial uses that require high visibility, larger buildings and floor space, open storage, and increased parking needs. As mentioned, residential uses are not permitted. The existing residential uses on the lot are long established and are considered legal nonconforming and would be permitted to continue on the subject lands. The highway commercial zone requires a minimum lot area of 1,000 square meters and a minimum lot frontage of 20 meters. So the property at 158 Albert Street currently has a frontage of 15 meters and a lot area of 12,000 square meters. So they're already deficient in terms of frontage on this property. And if the severance is approved, then they would also be deficient in terms of lot area. And so the special HC zoning provision is needed to address those deficiencies. However, even with the new lots created, 164 would continue to meet the requirements of the HC zone. So there would be no special provisions needed on 164 Albert Street. In order to permit the proposed residential use, the subject lots are proposed to be rezoned from HC to residential first density, and there have been no special provisions requested in the HC zone. In terms of additional information, there's no issues from a PPS standpoint. One thing you will note in the report is that we have noted that this is an area with archaeological potential. So either an archaeological assessment will be required or confirmation from an archaeologist that it's been substantially disturbed and that potential no longer exists. In terms of the Bruce County official plan, it is primary urban. Just one other thing to note, I would encourage the committee to consider rezoning the subject lands to residential second density. That was not the application, but I think it should be considered at this meeting to allow for a wider range of uses and provide additional density on the site. The subject lands are well suited for additional density and would still be compatible with surrounding land uses and forms. That doesn't mean the application would have to change at all. The applicant could still develop it in 3 single detached properties. It would just allow for potential other uses into the future. And also, just to note that Lee Lane, this is Lee Lane as it currently is, it would be subject to upgrades prior to any development. In terms of the comments we've received from staff and agencies, town staff has noted some of those requirements to Lee Lane, including the potential to install a turnaround, upgrades to the water main, as well as grading, drainage, and stormwater management plans. They've also identified the potential to engage with the owner of 160 Lee Lane, which is the only property fronting exclusively onto Lee Lane. All those other properties have other frontage onto Spence Street. In terms of the Conservation Authority, they did not recommend the preparation of an EIS and noted that the subject properties are not subject to the SPCA's regulation. However, there are portions of Lee Lane that may be within the approximate regulated area, and if so, if there's upgrades to those areas, the SPCA should be contacted. In terms of all the other agencies, there were no objections or opposition raised and no other comments received. So we haven't received any formal public comments at this point, but anything heard at this meeting will be taken down and summarized in the subsequent report. So just to summarize, this is a local official plan and zoning bylaw amendment requested to change the designation of the rear of the subject lands from highway commercial to residential and rezone those same lands from HC to R1. This will allow for the creation of 3 new residential lots to be applied for at a later date. The application will also add special provisions to the lot at, I think that should be 153 Albert Street, to permit a reduced frontage and lot size. And so our recommendation is that this be received as information and that we will return with a recommendation based on what we hear tonight.
Thank you, Tessa. So I think what we'll do now is open it to the public. Is there any member of the public who would like to speak to this application? Just hang on, we have one coming here. If you want to come first, then just come to the mic and state your name. Just hang on, just to the mic here, please. So, okay, just state your name, please.
I've got, my hip is displaced and it's hurting.
Okay.
But my daughter...
Just for the record, please state your name.
James Colhoun. My daughter resides right at the corner of Lee Lane and Spence Street. Now, for years, the snow from Spence Street has been shoved on her front lawn over top of her driveway, which I have had to come with my truck and my plow and clean out. Now, you are asking for this proposal to literally open this road up to 3 lots, which in the application was only 2 lots. Where are you going to widen the street and where are you going to put the snow? Now, 2 years ago, I had to put a new sewer system in for my daughter. If you decide to widen that road, you're going to be literally taking that new sewer line that I just put in for my daughter out of my pocket. Now, who's going to pay for that? Am I not right in asking these questions?
Yeah, absolutely you are. And as Tessa said, we will take all these comments and they will be taken into consideration when the recommendation comes back to the committee.
If you look on the survey, if you go to the opposite side of the road on Lee Lane, it goes down and then jogs back in towards the road, which means you're going to be taking that other gentleman's driveway, which I'm not sure of what his name is, and he will have no driveway. So that means the only way you're going to widen that street is going towards my daughter's property and my son-in-law's. So I want to know, before this proposal goes all the way through, on which way this is going to go.
So this evening we're just gathering all this information so that we can respond to it. Okay.
No.
So it will come.
I realize that.
Okay, that's one of the reasons. And if you, by all means, I think we have a sign-up sheet. We have a sign-up sheet at the back there. By all means, sign it. This will come back to the committee for a recommendation that would then go to council. So there's at least 2 more meetings before that. So by all means, stay involved, and you'll see what the recommendation comes back. Hopefully it addresses all of your concerns.
Why I am literally talking for my daughter and my son-in-law is they're both mentally challenged. They don't understand what is going on. All they received was this piece of paper in the mail. And to me, you don't treat citizens of Saugeen Shores in that way of giving them a piece of paper and expecting them to understand when they're mentally challenged. They are old enough to hold property. They are old enough to work. But they don't understand what they are given. Now, I had to race here tonight to be here on time for this meeting. I'm a contractor. I had to drive from Hepworth to be here. And it's upsetting to me that I have to literally try and say to use people what they need to know.
If I can be of any help, and I certainly sympathize with you, if at any time you have either Katie or if there's any information that you're apprehensive about, please call our town staff. They'd be more than willing to try and explain it to you and help you through this process and help you understand what the application is all about. So don't hesitate to call at any time, Katie.
Yeah, but they had to ask me what these papers.
Okay, I appreciate that, and so hopefully we can make sure.
And that's what I'm trying to explain to you.
Okay.
Is there is more than just my daughter in this community.
Oh, I'm well aware of that.
That this is happening to. And it's upsetting to me.
Okay, I think we're going
Okay,
to keep dealing with the public, Mike, and get those comments before we go to the committee.
I am I'm finished on what I have to say for right now, but I don't appreciate being told there was only 2 severances on that piece of paper and then turning around and seeing now that they want 3.
Okay, and again, what I say, we're trying to collect information for a recommendation to the committee. So thank you very much.
Yeah, but again, like I say, when you take and put an application in for 2 severances and then you turn around and add the 3rd one, that's not right off the bat.
Okay.
That's a no.
Okay, thanks. By all means, make sure you sign the sign-out sheet. Okay, thank you. So the next speaker, please.
Hi, I'm Ron Davidson. I'm planning consultant. I'm here representing the 2 landowners of the 2 properties, Whitecold Limited and Sarah Trelford. Representing Whitecold Limited tonight is Matt Whitecold. You know him probably better as one of the 2 brothers that's part of the home business or home builders business of David Utley. So this application that has been filed is for an official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment. To be clear, we have not filed applications for severance. We did make it very clear in our application form that we would be filing 3 severance applications. They have not been filed. 2 of the severances will occur on the rear portion of Matt's property, and the 3rd severance, when we apply for it, will occur on the rear portion of Sarah Trelford's property. I don't have a whole lot to say here. Tessa has gone through the application and has explained what the intent is. From my perspective, we're looking at the rear of some highway commercial lands that are, of course, designated highway commercial. In my mind, they serve very little use as commercial lands. I don't think anybody living on that lane or living in that area would want to see commercial development occur at on the back half of those lands with all that commercial traffic going down the lane. It is a small lane. It is a quiet lane. Matt is well aware of his requirements to improve the lane. He has been speaking. There's been additional information since that letter was written to Tessa. And those discussions actually started before Matt and I filed the application. The lane will not be widened to any great extent. In fact, it's my understanding it won't be widened at all. There's 18 feet of gravel right now, and when all is said and done, there'll be 15 feet of pavement and 3 feet of gravel. So the intent there is to keep it a nice little quaint, sleepy little lane, if you want to call it that. That's all I have to say. If this gets approved, or when this gets approved, again, Matt is well aware that, first of all, there's got to be severance applications filed, and through that process, he will have to enter into an agreement with the municipality to pay for the road improvements and to pay for the services to be extended properly. I think it's the sewer, the water main. The water main, I think, is very small that goes down that road, so it has to be improved. That's all I got. If I have any questions, I'll just stand.
Thank you. Is there any other member of the public who would like to speak to this application? Please just...
Hi, my name is Rick Martin, and my mother owns a property at 154 Albert Street. And I just had a question just regarding the size of the lots that would be remaining. And my mother's is zoned highway commercial, obviously, and I'm just wondering whether, in fact, if they're going to be all small lots, why they wouldn't all be rezoned as a residential rather than leaving them as highway commercial.
Tessa, the question?
Well, the application was for the rear, so it wasn't brought to us to rezone this. I mean, this property is still very much feasible as a highway commercial lot, despite the residential use. It is currently being used commercially and has that potential. I think just having the frontage on the highway, the idea was to keep that as highway commercial. And there's no, the existing residential use is existing. It's legal non-conforming. There's no issue in that continuing. So it really doesn't have there's no, as long as the residential use remains residential,
yes,
it can do
yes.
so into perpetuity. So there's no real gain by switching it over to residential other than paper. But this way it does, in the future, if there are changes, then at least there's a potential for highway commercial there if the use is looking to change. But having it be residential doesn't change anything.
Are the lots big enough then for to remain as highway commercial?
So this one currently does not meet the standard in terms of frontage. It does with the rear. It meets the lot size, but not the frontage. This one does currently meet the provisions of the highway commercial.
And what about 154th?
This one
Right
here?
Yeah.
That looks like it's about the same as this one, so it would be. It would also not meet the provisions.
I think it's a little bit longer than the other one, but
yeah, but it probably is under 1,000 square meters, I would think, looking at this.
Okay.
So.
Yep, that's why I was just wondering whether when you're going through this process, whether in fact they would be all deemed as residential, because that would be obviously a benefit to her to be able to build a new house on that lot if she would so choose.
Yeah, if there's an existing dwelling, there's no reason why it can't continue as a residential use on the property.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other members of the public would like to speak to this?
Hi. I live on Lee Lane, so that's what...
Just please state your name for the record, please.
Pardon?
Just state your name for the record.
Oh, sorry, Colin Holmes.
Okay, thank you. Yep, yes.
I live on Lee Lane, and my only concern is the width of the lane. It already encroaches on my property by at least a foot at the north end and 2 or 3 feet at the south end. So that's the thing that concerns us. And then you're talking about widening the lane.
Okay. If that's your concern, thank you very much for it.
Pardon?
Thanks very much, and Tessa will take that into consideration when she comes back with the recommendation. Just-
Sorry, my hearing's not as good as it used to be.
that happens to us all.
Oh, that's all. Okay, right.
Okay, any other members of the public would like to speak to this application? Ask one more time. Would anybody else like to speak to this application? If not, then I'll say, is the committee got any concerns or questions? Start with Councillor Mike Myatt.
I just had a quick question. I think it was Mr. Calhoun. Was that the name, Mr. Calhoun? I just wondering, one of the comments he made, it was a little concerning, and Mr. Mayor, was about the septic system, sewer line, that he paid significant dollars and that would have to be reconstructed. And I just need a clarification, Mr. Davidson. Is there something to do with, he's talking about servicing? They spent a lot of money on servicing his daughter's property. That would have to be changed. I don't understand that.
I think the point is, the question, Mike. I don't think we're likely to approve any. If that's a raised concern, then we'll address it in the recommendation. We will not make sure that you have to get a new sewer out of this. So,
all I was asking, service runs parallel to Lee Lane.
yes.
If they widen Lee Lane,
Well, okay. So no. So what I'm trying to do is reassure you that we will not be taking anybody's services away with this recommendation,
what I'm asking is,
or causing you any money to do.
we literally have to widen Lee Lane.
Yes.
Be taking that literally paid for, and then the town had to fix the road
Okay.
because of tree problem.
Okay. I can assure you that we will address that concern, and it won't be a concern to you. Okay.
That's what
I appreciate.
I was asking.
Okay, I appreciate that, Mr. Calhoun. Go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay. I think I'll go to Councillor Grace, and we'll get over there. Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is also about Lee Lane, and perhaps Jay would be best to answer this. One of the statements about the town's requiring the potential to install a turnaround on Lee Lane. Is that something you could comment on, why that would be necessary, where that would be?
It certainly, as the comment was written, that was as a potential.
Yes.
But in further discussions with the applicant, it's not required. But the idea would have been to allow town vehicles to turn around, say, during snow maintenance. But we've been satisfied that that's not a requirement in this case.
Just a follow-up. So that Lee Lane is regularly plowed?
I think it is, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. We can make note of that also. Is there any other comments? I'll start here, Vice Deputy Mayor Hugh, and then we'll get there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just as a comment, the planner did make a suggestion in her comments about, despite the fact that the applicants are asking for a change to R1, that we consider R2. I would just respectfully suggest that this is an undersized lane to begin with. It's certainly not intended to be a through street, and I don't see any need to make these R2 lots. R1 seems to serve the purpose of the applicants, and I think we should respect that in this case. Thank you.
Councillor Minaj.
Similarly, I wondered why the applicant maybe wouldn't consider some sort of merger of the two parcels, the middle parcel and the back of the lower parcel, and drive a laneway, a roadway, access way, and look at R3. So I actually would be interested in R2 if they had access through to Highway 21 at that point, which is Albert Street, of course. I knew that. So that would be one thought. The other thought is, could we clearly ask staff to tell us about the history of Lee Lane and the intent of if it's a public road, what its boundaries are, what the setbacks from the property lines are, how much room there really is there, and whether or not this 15-foot paved section and 3 feet of gravel is appropriate, because there are a number of reasons why. But I would like to know how that road fits in. How we call it a lane, but it's can service those properties as road access. And we've heard a number of comments and queries about it. So if we could get a staff report, a supplemental staff report about how that road fits into the road categories of the community and all those details I mentioned, that would be appreciated.
Councillor Madison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And through you, having known this property quite well as a child growing up, where my family owned the factory that used to be there, my one question is, the property to the north of Rexall, when it gets developed, this lane will not be an access point for the property, will it?
It's not intended to preserve any access, but if there was any change, it'd be in front of council for future consideration.
Okay, because we know the old road that used to be there, as was stated, it jagged and cut off a lot of, it wasn't straight, so that's why we have to fix this up. And it's been a long time since Lee Lane has been paved. I remember driving into it as a young guy when I first got my license, when it was broken up gravel at that time. So now it's due for fixing. So I look forward to this development as long as we meet the needs of all our residents in that area. So thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? If not, then that's the end of this public meeting. Like I said, this will staff will compile all the comments and come back with a recommendation at a later meeting. So if you're interested in it, by all means, sign the sign-up sheet it's out in the hall there, and we'll make sure you get information on it. So the next item on the agenda then again is the Saugeen Shores Official Plan Amendment number 30-18.44 and zoning bylaw number 24-1844 for the Union Building Corporation of Canada for 116 Shipley Avenue and 146 Bruce Road 25. And again, I'll ask our planner to present her report. I'll just remind you again, this is again a public meeting. We will again compile all the comments and come back with a recommendation at a final future date for council.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. For those of you who aren't aware of who I am, I'm Dan Kingsbury, the senior planner with Bruce County, and I'll be giving this report this evening. So the application proposes to amend the town's official plan as well as the comprehensive zoning bylaw to recognize an existing parking use on the subject lands and to facilitate the expansion of the existing parking use from 4 vehicles to 8 vehicles. If I could just point on the map, the subject lands are comprised of this hatched area, which I believe to be approximately 452 square meters. And just some broader context, they're part of 2 properties owned by Union Building Corp of Canada, also known as Unifor. Surrounding uses include residential and institutional, namely Unifor's property. They are serviced by water and sewer, and access would be via Shipley Avenue. There's some additional context there. Conveniently, there are 4 vehicles parked when this air photo was taken in 2015 to give you an idea how the property is used now. It's ancillary parking, from what I understand, to Unifor's parking. This is the proposed parking area. So there's an entranceway in and out, and 4 parking spots on either side. Hard to really read the concept plan in too much detail, but there is an electric charge station proposed somewhere in here, one of those dots up there, and there's a 2x2 prefabricated electrical utility sort of building proposed here. This is the delineation of the EH zone as it currently stands. So part of those works are proposed in the EH zone. I should also note the proponent has received a permit from the SVCA for the construction of the proposed parking area and associated charging station infrastructure. Okay, moving on. So again, to recap, the purpose of the applications is to change the land use designation from shoreline residential to institutional, and to rezone the same lands, again, the hatched area, from R1 residential to institutional. The amendments will recognize an existing parking use as well as permit vehicular parking in conjunction with the institutional uses of the surrounding area and on the property. Again, it's proposing to recognize an existing parking use of 4 for 4 vehicles to allow a total of 8 in a more formalized parking area. The lands, in terms of provincial interests, the lands are within an area of high archaeological potential. So going forward, it's proposed that they would be subject to a hold through the zoning bylaw until such time as a licensed archaeologist has confirmed the need for an archaeological assessment. And if one is required, then one will have to be produced before that hold is released to the satisfaction of the town. So the lands are currently designated shoreline residential. Parking areas associated with institutional uses are not permitted in a shoreline residential area. But subsequently, the applicant is seeking to redesignate those lands to allow the use. In terms of agency comments, the town will require a stormwater management report to support the proposed parking area, as well as reserving the right to comment on the grading plan until receipt of the stormwater management report. If the applications are not approved, the applicant is required to restore the lands to their pre-altered state. If it is approved, the town requires a stormwater report and further opportunity to review the site plan for potential further refinements. In terms of the SVCA, they did recommend the did not recommend the preparation of an EIS. They did propose updated mapping to the area that would impact the delineation of the existing environmental hazard and environmental protection zones. So I'm going to go over that in a little more detail. Sorry, I thought that was included. In your staff report package, there should be the SVCA's letter including a map, and I'll be sure to update this at the next meeting to include this map for the public to see. But I should also note this is available information on the county's planning website. The SVCA, on one hand, we're okay with the principle of use to establish the lands as institutional. However, they have also indicated, and this is typical, a typical protocol of the SVCA, when they write comment letters, they provide updated mapping to delineate new information associated with the environmental hazard and EP zone. In this case, they provided updated mapping that would suggest the environmental hazard designation apply to the subject lands, the lands subject to the amendment. So going forward, understanding that they are okay with the principle of use, but would like to see updated mapping, one potential option would be to redesignate the lands to institutional and an environmental hazard designation with a special site-specific provision that would allow an 8-vehicle parking area. This discussion took place after the staff report was written, unfortunately, so I was not able to capture the SVCA's comments in full detail. So I'm merely sort of relaying the discussion that was had on Friday, and I anticipate getting further guidance or clarification from the SVCA before bringing this forward to committee for a decision, as well as to give the public an opportunity to view those comments online. So in terms of public comments, we did receive a number of public comments. Again, some of them came in before the report deadline, so this would have been Thursday, and a number of them came in after the report deadline, including up until this afternoon. So the summarization included on this slide may not include all the public comments received to date. It merely summarizes sort of broadly the comments that were received up until approximately Thursday morning. So just to summarize some of the issues identified in the comments, and these comments are attached to the staff report in their full detail as they were received. There are a number of comments related to the safety issues related to increased traffic on Shipley Avenue. Many people questioned the need for the parking area altogether, and if Unifor already has sufficient parking on site. There were concerns about installation of the charging equipment in an environmental hazard area, and some of the work that was already completed to date without permission. This site, for council's benefit, was subject to a stop work order issued by the SVCA prior to a development application being sought, an official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendment application being sought on the lands. There were comments regarding the legality of the existing use in relation to the zoning bylaw and how the parking area for 4 vehicles came about. And again, more issues related to the narrow width of Shipley Avenue and just the number of different uses that are occurring on Shipley, including pedestrian and cycling uses. Again, this is not a complete summarization of public comments, but they have been included in the staff report to date. And I believe Jay may have included some of the, if not all of the comments received after the report deadline of Thursday. So to recap, in summary, the official plan amendment that's being requested is to change the designation in the official plan from shoreline residential to institutional, and to rezone those lands from R1 to institutional. What's not indicated on the presentation, and again, this is just the timing that the reports were due, is subject to further confirmation and guidance from the SVCA. Those designations may be an environmental hazard designation with a special provision for that site specifically and for that use for 8 vehicles. Again, that will be forthcoming in the next staff report. My apologies that it was not included in this one. So again, the amendment is to recognize an existing use and to facilitate the development of a more formalized use on the lands for 8 vehicles. And it would be subject to a holding provision for to confirm the need for an archaeological assessment. So the recommendation is that PAC receive this, the planning committee receive this report for information, and that planning staff will record any comments and comment on them in a subsequent meeting.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Daniel. So is there any member of the public who would like to speak to this application?
There we go. Sorry about that. I'm here tonight representing Unifor, as is Travis Burnside, the engineer from Cobide Engineering, who I'm sure you all know. And Jeff Schnarr is also representing Unifor tonight, and he looks after head of maintenance? Head of maintenance. There we go. There's not really much for me to say. It's a gravel parking lot, or pardon me, it's a parking lot. It has existed for a number of years as 4 sites or 4 parking spaces, and they're trying to expand it into 8. There's a fair amount of engineering that had to go into this after the Conservation Authority got involved, and as Dan has indicated, the Conservation Authority has issued their permit because it's within a regulated area, so they're good to go. The parking lot itself, hopefully it's not going to cause any traffic problems. We heard some concerns there, or I thought I read some concerns today that was an issue. Just so everybody understands, it'll be a parking lot, your typical parking lot, not like a driveway where you drive in and back out, and then you nudge your rear end into traffic, if you will. This will be a parking lot where you pull in, and then when you're ready to leave, you back out, but in your parking area, and then you pull out with the front of your car. So it's a parking lot. It's not a driveway where you're backing out. So hopefully that resolves issues with regard to traffic. That's about all I have to say. Other than, I guess, there's always a need for more parking. I've been to many public meetings before for developments where neighbors are usually concerned with lack of parking, and I think now the issue, ironically, is there's maybe we don't need this parking lot, but Unifor begs to differ. That's my presentation, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Ron. Any other member of the public would like to speak to this application? Please come forward.
Individual speaking, but my husband and I had the fortune of being able to purchase 114 Shipley. 114 Shipley is adjacent to this Unifor parking, Unifor and the Unifor parking pad. You obviously know the previous owner, who is actually now one of our tenants, and Greg and his wife Elaine Schmaltz are actually renting the property from us until we transition over into the full-time owners. My husband and I have a variety of concerns, some of which I believe were addressed, but forgive me because I'm new at this, I'm new to the neighborhood. I'd love to understand how this process works, where development can start without a permit, without notifying the residents until well after the fact. I just don't know if anyone can give me a straight answer right now or tell me about that a little later. I know there's a bit of history with Unifor doing this, so I'm just curious if this will be the first time, second time, fourth time. This seems to be a precedent. Again, it's partly why we're very concerned, new owners coming in, and we're seeing this happen within the first year of our purchase. Can anyone answer?
Do you want to try? No, I can tell you. I don't know. This is, to my mind, I think this is probably the first time for this particular application. I don't know for sure, but this is something that certainly the town does not condone, where there's permits required for anything. we would ask that people come forward. We don't have eyes everywhere, though, and there's lots of places all along the community that things happen that we don't always see. But where we get the information, and I hope that's, I guess part of it is, as residents, if you got information, you think something's wrong, by all means inform the town and we will respond to it.
Certainly. Okay, thank you. So I'll assume that it's never known until the neighbors alert the city then. And I appreciate you have quite a number of residents with different agendas, so you're working with the tools you're given. I'll highlight a couple of key points. Our primary concerns are certainly safety, but when my husband and I purchased this property, if anyone has been to the property or is familiar with the property, it has this fabulous stream that trout use, I'll say. And so because of that, the Schmaltzes have spent an extensive amount of time and effort and money making sure that that stream is maintained, as well as some of the other adjacent residents. I believe Unifor does the same, but again, I don't know because of their pattern of history. I kind of worry. But that said, my concern is specifically environmentally related because this trout stream, as it extends through our property, is at risk because if you look at the actual positioning of, and again, I haven't seen any clear diagrams showing the actual build of these electrical cables for these charging stations, but my understanding is it's in that area close to the floodplain. The stream is known to flood. With climate change, as we've seen even today, we see that it changes invariably and we can't control for it, and I'm very concerned that these electrical charging stations are built right next, adjacent to this trout stream. What are the impacts to the environment from a perspective of water safety, from the perspective of the actual wildlife safety? I've gone in and in my submission I included some quotes from the Saugeen SVCA, Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority, and I just wanted to, I can highlight them for you, or I'm not sure if everyone has had a chance to read any of our rebuttals, and if you follow the logic, but essentially some of the concerns are about one, the role, specifically about the watershed. So we wanted to know, we'd like to keep the trout stream. We have lots of young family members. My husband's family has been here in Port Elgin for over 100 years. My aunts are here. We have lots of family friends who are also here. And the point of it is we have lots of next generations coming through. The kids come through. They want to see the trout. They want to see the streams. We're very careful. We want to enjoy the environment, and that was the main purpose. And we want to protect the environment. As new owners, we want to make sure that we are doing this the due diligence and being proper stewards. But again, really the two key concerns are the wildlife, the safety. Highlight one more thing. So I'll talk about safety in a moment because I know it was alluded to with respect to traffic, but I'll also talk about noise and light pollution. So while the intent is to build this parking pad, the parking pad being given the larger footprint, and my understanding it's not even zoned for a parking pad as it currently stands. I think if it was in fact actually a former residence that was demolished and this was just a temporary stopgap that again never got formal permits for even the temporary parking pad that exists as it stands. Again, suggests another history of questionable practices where you build and then ask for forgiveness. But my concern as well is that if we're building this parking pad, you're going to have more lights and more we'll have more traffic flowing through. What that will mean is the noise from all the different traffic coming in and going, the light pollution from these tall light posts that will now be flooding into my property will impede our enjoyment of privacy, relaxation, stargazing. I mean, one of the joys of getting away from where I live right now is to come up here and get away from the noise, get away from the light, and enjoy and be one with nature. The joy of this property is it's quite secluded. It's lovely. We actually even were discussing on the ride up about how there are wildlife like bears running through here. Don't get that very often in Toronto, but it does happen on occasion. But my point of all of this is we want to make sure that we maintain the natural environment and coexist peacefully with the environment. And I still don't understand why Unifor needs this property space, because they have abundance of parking and they keep scooping up property around the perimeter Again, that's another separate issue, but it is a concern if I look at the long-term vision. I'll also comment one more thing. So from a safety perspective, again, we mentioned the flooding. Flooding is a concern. It's a known floodplain where they're building these charging station. Is anyone also managing the inspections? How is that done? Is it going to be transparent? Who's held accountable? What are the liabilities? Is insurance going to cover any risk to the, not only the residents, but to the city? And then on top of that, we did talk, there was discussion about traffic. Yes, there may be in and out flows for the parking lot, but the fact of the matter is it's a very narrow street with the immediate turning point near that parking pad. It doesn't make sense to me why they would put it there when they could simply continue extend from the existing turnabout from the parking lot where the housing, I guess, off the County Road 25, so just a little bit further west of Shipley is another turning pad for the guest housing. Why is that not in consideration? If they're going to build charging stations, that would be a perfect spot. It would just be like a resident. Most people intuitively know if you have a chargeable car, you actually charge your car at home, just right up front, attached to your garage. So that would be more intuitive. You have it even closer to the car and home. My other concern is we are concerned about loss of privacy. Again, with more and more people coming to this parking lot and different types of traffic flows, we're going to lose some privacy. There will probably be some security cameras, and then of course the general loss of personal privacy while we have more and more uniformed members encroaching on our shared property border. Last comment I'll make is about the beautification. So one of the nice parts about Shipley and even Port Elgin in general is the fabulous gardens. People spend a lot of time caring for their property, very respectful, and the beautification of Shipley is one of the key features for us. The residents that respect the environment, they tend to their gardens, and the proposed parking lot will detract from that. We're going to have this massive parking concrete pad where there was, prior to this unannounced build, some trees and some flora, and now that's gone. And then we're going to have more cement. And again, as I comment in summation, really, husband and I are extremely concerned about this plan rezone. I know it's small in the uniform spectrum because they have such a monster footprint, but at the end of the day, this is a nice little residential street that's being gobbled up by a big institutional, somewhat corporate entity, and we're very, very concerned. We actually plead, please don't do this. You're going to set a precedent that is very dangerous. You need to slap them on the wrist and say, stop doing this, and behave like you treat all the other residents. Residents don't have the same. If we did this as a resident, we would never get the permit. Seriously. So, as I said, please respect our environment, start to be stewards of the environment, and more importantly, also respect your residents, not just the businesses that are here. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Is there any other member of the public who would like to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Our family's been on Shipley since 1936. Unifor is no longer a welcome entity on Shipley. The 600 complaints on the wind turbine prove that. They haven't done one thing with regard to the complaints there. I am sure the same will happen with this 8-car electronic catastrophe. There will be no, Unifor will do nothing with regard to any complaint that anybody will file on that. They've completed a lot of the work already. In my view, they probably should be indicted either criminally or quasi-criminally for that. They were successful in making the place urban. Can you imagine Shipley urban to get that wind turbine up? So they bully their way in, and they continue to bully their way in. They've got enormous parking up on top of the roof there, on top of the coming down 25. They've got enormous parking facilities within the confines of their place. This parking pad looks like the devil. In my view, and the main problem is safety. There are kids constantly walking near there. There's a post office place there that people are walking up to constantly. I hear Bruce or Unifor saying, well, people aren't backing up out of this thing. Well, certainly they're backing up. They can't go through the trees. They have to back up. And they're stacked two. So two cars are going backwards at the same time, being screened by both. The safety concerns are enormous. People bike there. They particularly walk there. And cars come along occasionally, but not often. This is a shocking thing that Unifor has done. And as a bully and as an unwelcome entity, we just wish they would pack up and leave. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mann. Any further comments from the public?
Thanks for those comments, Aaron. You're giving me seller's remorse, describing my property like that. Dear members of council and county planning, thank you for this opportunity to speak to this development. I bring some unique perspectives, having lived on the adjacent property for 28 years and having made a similar request for a new driveway in the same E8 zone. My proposed works, as does Unifor's, were tree removal, excavation, and placement of new compacted fill suitable for vehicles to drive and to park on if needed. After my submitted presentation is read, I'd like to highlight the relevant sections of the provincial policy statement, the Saugeen Shores official plan, and the zoning bylaw that the Bruce County planner relied on to recommend my application be refused. It is my contention these same sections may have relevance to the Unifor parking lot project. I'd like to state that I'm here wearing hopefully just two hats tonight. One has, well, probably three since I'm a renter of the property now. But as a private citizen, Greg Schmaltz, and also as the president of the Beachers Association, I've received numerous complaints from Beacher members, a lot of whom live on Shipley, we're proud to say, since construction first began with the destruction of approximately 20 mature white pine trees on the edge of the stream. They were planted there, I might remind you, to fill in Ken Willette's residential house that was torn down when he left as manager of the community center. And as an aside, I find it astounding that an illegal use can be used as a reason to continue and expand an illegal use. My name is Greg Schmaltz, and I currently reside at 114 Shipley as a renter, having sold this property last year after living there since 1994. I'm also the president of the Port Elgin and Saugeen Beachers Association, which has over 200 property owners, many members of which are in the impacted area by this proposed development. This letter is from me personally and on behalf of the Beachers organization and its members. Last fall, we observed many full-grown pine trees taken out and excavation taking place on the residential lot across from Unifor's main gate on Shipley Avenue. The lot was previously the home of Unifor Center Manager, and the house has since been demolished and the site illegally used as parking lot for several years. In the past, neighborhood residents and Beacher members have expressed concerns about pedestrian, cycling, and vehicle safety as cars leave this parking lot and back out onto the road into traffic. According to residents, several near misses have occurred on this sole entry-exit way to the Gobles neighborhood and onto the Port Elgin beach by walking or biking. When the Beachers inquired with the town and SVCA as to the development, it quickly became apparent that no permits had been applied for from the town or the Conservation Authority. This is very disturbing, as this land is designated an environmental hazard and Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority has been very strict with local member residents proposing any development in E8 zones. Needless to say, any activity these days requires a minimum town approval. Unifor staff advised an expanded car parking lot complete with electric car charging stations was being built. Electrical components had already been installed underground adjacent to the edge of the stream, which is flooded in this exact EH zone. I've been there in February, frozen ground, rainstorm, and that stream, which is usually 3 feet wide, a few inches deep, was 20 feet wide because we measured it with a tape. That vault on the side of the stream bed that was pointed out earlier is right adjacent to the stream bed. It's unconscionable how a vault could be put at the edge of a stream. Electrical components had already been installed underground adjacent to the edge of the stream, which is flooded in this area. Upon notifying SVCA, they attended at the site and put a stop work order on it. The town advised Unifor would have to make the appropriate applications for rezoning for the project, and that's why we're here tonight. Unifor's blatant disregard for its neighbors and the rule of law, proceeding halfway through this construction job without even taking out a building permit nor SVCA permit, while trying to expand what already was an illegal parking lot, all in the hopes of rushing it to completion and then begging for forgiveness afterwards. Their behavior is especially offensive as they're aware of these permission requirements, having just obtained the same for their large parking lot addition, a short distance away from this site. This intended duping of the authorities should be grounds enough to deny this application. How many everyday residents could expect to get away with this behavior and prevail after being caught red-handed? How many residents will be allowed to change the master plan to allow them to convert their residential lot to a virtually 100% coverage parking lot complete with car charging stations? Major issues identified to us have been walking, biking, and car safety, as there are no sidewalks on this sole busy link to the neighborhood and to the existing bike walk route to Port Elgin's main beach. High volume of vehicular use, as the proposed parking lot size has doubled from 4 to 8 cars, and the site offers electric car charging services, all of which were not contemplated, nor approved for in the originally intended residential use of this site. This is a highly congested area already, with residents using this single entry-exit way to the neighborhood, Unifor office staff and visitor vehicles entering the main gate and existing parking lot, tour buses pulling up and unloading, a Unifor pedestrian crosswalk across Shipley Avenue, a neighborhood mailbox newspaper pickup site, and a cycle/pedestrian link through onto the main beach in Port Elgin. Already Unifor has a huge parking lot that has just been newly expanded with Saugeen Valley and town approval, which is much better suited to staff and visitor parking, to tour bus unloading and unloading, to car charging stations, than this small residential lot located on a busy neighborhood artery road. This parking lot development and car charging service is not an intended nor recommended use of an EH property. Underground electrical components buried in a proven floodplain in a wooded area is a potential danger and fire hazard. Unifor has not demonstrated an absolute operational need for this parking lot and its charging stations to be located here, unduly adding to risk. We are seeking permission for this development to be denied and the property remediated to its original natural state. On a positive note, we would suggest the highest and best use for this land would be for it to be donated by Unifor to the town for use as a pedestrian/cyclist-friendly mini parkette, complete with drinking water fountain, bike stands, picnic tables, and stream view bench seating. In this way, it would function as a restive stop and be a contributing factor in supporting the use of Shipley Avenue as part of the new County Road 25 Master Plan pedestrian/cycling path system. Having done my own personal application, immediately, and I mean immediately next door, where I sought to put in a 25-foot wide easement and a driveway to cross over the stream, I took a look at the similarities in what they are doing from the road to the stream and what I applied for. Now, keeping Stuart Doyle and his clock in consideration tonight, I'm asking for your input, because what I have with me is what Ron Davidson, who worked for me at the time as a planning consultant on my project, described to me as a booklet from the county. It's a booklet. Now, in this booklet, I've highlighted the relevant parts of the provincial policy statement, the official plan, and the zoning for Saugeen Shores. And with the guidance I'm looking for tonight is I can ramble off those sections for you guys to follow up and study, or I could in fact put pen to paper and prepare those and have those typed and sent to you folks and to the county planner tomorrow. I would assume that that's probably a better thing to do, but I'll leave it to your discretion.
Yeah, I would prefer if you did it that way, Greg. So I think we've got a couple other things on the agenda, but I think if each member got a copy of it, we could certainly consider it before this is just to gather information. Again,
yep.
This will come back with the recommendations for some time, so ensure that we get that information so that council has access to it before we make a decision.
Great. Okay. Appreciate it. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Greg. Is there any other members of the public who would like to speak to this?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My name's John Kiles, and to be honest, I wasn't going to speak tonight. But that said, I will also say I have nothing fresh to add to the arguments that were so eloquently stated by Aaron and Greg and others. But when Marilyn and I renovated our cottage from a seasonal residence to a 4-season residence 13 years ago, we needed permission to do absolutely everything. And we followed it to the letter. And I didn't know the first thing about building permits. All I knew was that I wanted our family cottage to be our permanent residence in our retirement. So we counted on the town to help us through it. We got a contractor who followed everything to the letter. We did everything that we were supposed to do. And if I might say, if we think south of the border now, how many times have we recently heard nobody is above the law? Well, I think somebody in this community might very well be above the law. Unifor have been bullying us in our community for years and years and years. If this was the first example, perhaps it wouldn't be so serious. But there is a litany of examples. And this is a perfect opportunity for you as members of council to say enough is enough and stop this project. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, John. So is there any other member of the public who would like to speak to this item? One more time, anybody from the public who would like to speak to this particular application? If not, thank you for your participation. We'll take questions from the committee. Start with Councilor Grace this time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know that there are several representatives speaking for Unifor here tonight. I guess, should be a simple question. Why, I guess I'll preface it first with maybe a question to Jay. Can I confirm that the project was initially started in the fall without obtaining a building permit?
Yes. Yeah, as far as I know, it was pre-grading, and storage of the material was started without any consideration of the zoning bylaw.
Thank you. Okay, so my next question, if I may, is for one of the Unifor spokespeople. Why did Unifor start the project without a permit?
If just before you answer that, can you please come to the mic so everybody can hear it because we're televised? Just state your name so for the record.
Just if I could, Mr. Schnarr, just one follow-up question. Did you check with any town officials to check that understanding? Or with the SVCA? Thank you.
Councillor Myatt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I guess there's a question of Unifor as well. And I mean, this goes back to 1980s when, from my research I've done anyways, is that when CAW redeveloped and expanded the Family Education Center, it was my understanding that in former Saugeen Township days that this all was a concern to the residents way back when the facility was expanded, with traffic concerns. And the way Unifor CW at the time answered the concerns of the residents about increased traffic was to move the parking up on top of the hill. And I don't know what's changed between the 1980s and now, because I think that they've added a new parking lot up top. And I guess my question to CAW is, if the whole argument discussion took place with Saugeen Township days, why is there 8 additional spots needed today? Back in the 1980s, that question was resolved. So that I don't understand. I don't understand the need. I do have some concerns. I'd like to pass this on to you, Mr. Mayor, the planners. Is that, I do pick up flyers from that mailbox down on Shipley Avenue. It's a very, very busy road. Cars coming in and out constantly to pick up mail. Right across the road from the parking lot is the entrance to CAW. Cyclists during the summertime, particularly tour season, that road becomes extremely busy. And so I think there are traffic concerns, there are safety concerns, and in addition to the environmental issues that was so eloquently presented by Aaron and others. But so I think that those comments that are being passed on from the residents are real concerns, and hope those are taken into consideration when the final report comes out, because I think parking was dealt with back in the 1980s, and there should be no change to that in my view.
Councillor Minaj.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple of comments and maybe a question and then an opinion, I suppose. Well, if I address this to our head planner, Dan. Dan, why does the documentation package state that this is an existing parking area that will be changed from 4 spaces to 8 spaces, and then later in the same paperwork it says the uses proposed same with additional parking? So if you're acknowledging on behalf of the municipality in Bruce County that this was an approved 4-unit parking spot, can you please provide the documentation, the reference number of the original permits that allowed the 4 spaces to be created? And if that doesn't exist, then can we please change the documentation to say that this is not an existing parking area, this is not the same use as proposed? So I would ask that you consider that. The notion that it becomes institutional is in keeping with the Corporation Unifor's property. I believe that's all institution as well. And there's reason to think that at some point we've had a very happy love relationship, Corporation of Saugeen Shores, Corporation of the Township of Saugeen Township, in the past with the CAW and with Unifor. There are rub points, and we know there are rub points. Obviously the windmill is one. At some point, though, we would want to take a low road or a high road approach, depending on your view of cup half empty, half full, and say, can we force the issue here and say, put it all back to the way it is, or can we find some sort of blended option that, in particular, I like the one that Greg is supporting, where he talks about donating it to the town and making it this beautiful spot for cyclists and picnic tables, etc. But you know what? I think we can reach further, and we could probably, I would like to think that we could probably even include 2 electric charging stations for two vehicles. Mind you, I too would like to see that somebody look at that electric box that's been created in the floodplain, albeit that we think the floodplain goes there, and it may have to be dug up and relocated. I agree with all of that. So finally, Mr. Mayor, I would like to think that maybe we shouldn't be looking for institutional zoning change. We should look for some sort of commercial zoning change, because they might charge for the electric charging stations, and therefore we should get taxes off that property. And I think that it would be more appropriate if the planners considered coming back with a change to residential, not to institutional, but residential to some kind of commercial entity where we can actually reap some benefit from it. And if we did get to where Greg wanted to be, we could use that money that we took as taxes to help maintain that beautification project. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just first point, just to straighten the record out for council as a result of something we heard a few minutes ago. This work was carried out in violation of the SVCA regulation. There was no SVCA permit issued before the work took place, and permit fees were charged. They were charged at double the rate, because that's the SVCA's policy when work is carried out in violation of the regulation. So, in fact, no SVCA permit was issued before work began. I was updated on the file as that was taking place, and so that's for your information. On the question I had for the planner is with regard to this hold provision that we're talking about pending the archaeological assessment. Why would we do that? Why would we not make sure all the paperwork is in place before we consider the application? I mean, speaking personally, I guess I would not like to see this application come back until the archaeological assessment is done, because how could we consider, we wouldn't give permission to a zoning change to build a house and without the archaeological assessment, or to dig a hole, right? I mean, we wouldn't do that. And if you can't do it without disturbing something that may be there from an archaeological standpoint, then you shouldn't have the zoning to do it in the first place. The thing is confusing to me. So, speaking for myself, I don't want to see it again until that's done. And then on the question of the building envelope, it says in the application that there isn't a sufficient building envelope for a home there, but there was a home there. I don't have any pictures of it, but I've been told by many people who would know, because they've lived there for a very long time, that, and certainly not in my memory, but there was a home there at one time. So we could just as easily be looking at, and I suspect the restriction that's in place that prevents that from taking place is not so much a practical problem as much as a regulatory issue, right? Perhaps there is obviously EH zone, which would require some sort of planning amendment to allow a home to be built there. But we could just as easily be looking at a planning amendment here to build a house, right? I mean, the idea that it can't be done is not exactly accurate. It's just that a parking lot can't be done in the same way because the zoning doesn't support it, right? So you can't do. I mean, that's what we're looking at here. So. I guess just for clarity, but the issue for me is, broadly speaking, that we have a lot of neighborhoods, we have lots of places where there's lots of houses, and this, I look at this as like being any other neighborhood, where you have rows of houses, and somebody at one point tears a house down, and for a little while, over a period of a number of years, people start parking their cars in there because that's what happens. People take up available space for their cars and start doing things like that. And then one day, the owner of that property says, well, I mean, this is a pretty good use here. I'm just going to pave it. And then it's a parking lot in a residential zone. And we wouldn't be okay with that happening all over the town. Our whole official plan is about intensification of housing uses, right? Of adding more housing, not creating big spaces full of parking lots in the middle of the residential zone. It seems to me the whole intent is counter to the intent of the official plan, which is greater intensification. I mean, we hear that over and over again. There's been a whole bunch of applications in the last number of years where that's the planning argument, that we should be intensifying the housing use inside the settlement area. So, and this is exactly the opposite of that on a property where, with some zoning changes, you could build a house potentially. So, so these are the questions, I guess, that are floating through my mind at the moment that you can file away and consider as you come back with an application. But like I say, and as I said at the beginning, I don't want to see this again until we have an archaeological assessment. Thank you.
Any further questions from the committee? If not, thank you, and thank you, members of the public. So we will await the return of our planners with a recommendation. So we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. Then is it's a staff report on to do with the pre-servicing agreement for Barry's Construction Limited, and I believe Jay Posner, our supervisor of development services, will present the report.
Yeah, so I'll just highlight three elements of this, or I guess a fourth. If you recall, we've done a pre-servicing agreement a few times now. This is generally the same format as those others, but obviously it's development dependent. In this case, this is to develop or at least service up to just over 100 dwelling units in the next stage of the Blue Water development, which is shown in red on the map. The blue shows the overall, and the red overlaid on the blue just shows the intended pre-servicing for the lots to be developed. I've highlighted that this includes some works, all the works within those red areas, but also includes some downstream drainage works which direct water from some overland flow over the ridge down towards the existing trail system. There's some wet areas you may be familiar with, and then eventually outlet through the creek to Lake Huron. There are some improvements in this agreement. And I guess also, if you'll recall from when they last did the draft planning approval revisions, there was some concern as to construction access. This agreement also limits the construction access to Ivings Drive unless otherwise authorized by town staff. There may be some exceptions depending on the type of services, and we're hopeful that that flexibility can be offered in this agreement. And that's it.
Thank you, Jay. So the recommendation is the council pass a bylaw to enter into a pre-servicing agreement with Barry's Construction and Installation Limited for phases 5, stage 2A and 2B of the Blue Water subdivision. Questions, comments? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Don't go away. There's one more there, Jay. The next item then is the pre-servicing agreement for Mystic Cove Developments. And again, if you want to, if you make that a lot shorter, yeah. I think it's probably the same argument. So I'll read the recommendation. If there's any questions, we'll deal with them. The recommendation is that council pass a bylaw to enter into a pre-servicing agreement with Mystic Cove Developments Incorporated for the Lakeside Woods subdivision. Questions, comments? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. So that brings as the end of our agenda. I'll take a motion to adjourn. Councillor Matheson and Deputy Mayor. All in favor? We're adjourned at 9:58. Thank you, everyone.